On July 20, 1969, the collective gaze of humanity was turned toward the heavens, specifically to a small, desolate patch of lunar dust known as the Sea of Tranquility. For those watching, it was the climax of a decade defined by ambition, Cold War competition, and the raw, unbridled power of human ingenuity. Neil Armstrong's boot press into the lunar regolith was more than a singular achievement. It was supposed to be the definitive proof that humanity was no longer tethered to the cradle of Earth. Yet, almost as soon as the signal returned to the terrestrial surface, a shadow of doubt began to creep into the public consciousness, a shadow that has not only refused to dissipate over the last half-century but has grown into a sprawling, multi-generational obsession. We are told that we went to the moon, that we walked among the stars, and that we left behind a legacy of technological dominance. But what if the greatest adventure in human history was actually the most elaborate performance in global media? What if the footprints in the dust were never made by human boots, but by the careful choreography of a soundstage tucked away in the Nevada desert? Tonight, we embark on an investigation into the persistent and pervasive world of moon landing conspiracy theories, not just to dismiss them as the ramblings of the fringe, but to understand why they endure, why the human mind is so susceptible to them, and how the weight of scientific evidence holds up under the lens of modern scrutiny. To understand the scope of this documentary, we have to recognize that the conspiracy is not merely a hobbyist's curiosity. It is a cultural phenomenon that challenges our very relationship with truth, government transparency, and scientific reality. Over the next 30 minutes, we will peel back the layers of the most popular claims, examine the historical context of the Apollo era, and ultimately demonstrate why the physical reality of the lunar missions is far more impressive than any fiction could ever be. In this first segment, we are focusing on the foundation of the skepticism itself. Why did the doubts begin in the first place? How did a collection of grainy television images spark a wildfire of skepticism that continues to burn in the digital age? We will look at the cultural atmosphere of the late 1960s, a time when institutional trust was beginning to fracture, and when the spectacle of the space race provided the perfect backdrop for the birth of a grand, cinematic myth. We are not just talking about light, shadow, and physics here, we are talking about the psychology of belief. We are talking about why, even in an era of unprecedented photographic resolution and orbital reconnaissance, millions of people still prefer the comfort of a staged conspiracy over the terrifying, beautiful truth of our cosmic reach. The skepticism began, perhaps, at the moment of the broadcast itself. Consider the experience of the average viewer in 1969. The images were not crisp, high-definition captures, they were ghostly, black-and-white transmissions, flicker-prone and distant, beamed across 238,000 miles of vacuum. For a generation accustomed to the glossy, orchestrated reality of Hollywood films, the live footage of the moon landings felt paradoxically fake because it looked so alien. Because it didn't look like a scene from a science fiction movie, it became vulnerable to the interpretation that it was, in fact, a bad movie. Critics would later point to the lack of stars in the background, the peculiar behavior of the American flag, and the oddly inconsistent shadow angles as proof of a high-stakes production. But we must address these points through the lens of the era. The skepticism was fueled by a lack of public understanding regarding photographic exposure, the mechanics of low-gravity lunar motion, and the technical limitations of space-ready camera equipment. We are looking at a history that is simultaneously very well documented and, to the untrained eye, easily misinterpreted. This documentary is designed to bridge that gap between technical reality and popular perception. We will traverse the history of the Apollo missions, from the tragedy of the Apollo 1 fire, which pushed the program to its limits, to the triumphant recovery that landed men on the moon just a few years later. It is a story of incredible risk, of thousands of engineers working in clandestine conditions, and of a mathematical precision that defies the notion of a simple hoax. If the moon landing were a conspiracy, it would have required the silence of 400,000 employees, the cooperation of hostile geopolitical rivals, and a level of long-term secrecy that is, frankly, impossible in the open society of the United States. And yet, the allure of the hoax remains. We are going to explore the psychology of why we doubt. Is it a defense mechanism against the daunting scale of our modern technological achievements? Is it a reactionary response to the perceived omnipotence of government institutions? Or is it something deeper, a fundamental human need to find patterns and hidden agendas in the chaos of our existence? As we delve into the mechanics of these arguments, you will see that the conspiracy theorists are often asking the right questions, even if they are landing on entirely wrong answers. When we discuss the why behind the moon landing conspiracy, we cannot ignore the atmosphere of the late 1960s. The Vietnam War was raging, the social fabric of the West was fraying, and the assassination of political leaders had created a deep-seated cynicism toward official narratives. When the government told the people of the world that they had won the race to the moon, it was received as a triumph of American exceptionalism. But for those who had watched their world turn upside down, it was just another stage-managed performance by the ruling elite. This is the bedrock of the skepticism. It is a political argument masquerading as a scientific one. The conspiracy is not fundamentally about the moon, it is about the distrust of power. We will spend the remainder of this hour dissecting the evidence, from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter's modern images to the physical samples of lunar basalt that continue to be studied by labs across the globe. But first, we must acknowledge that the doubt is not an anomaly. It is a feature of our culture. It is a testament to the fact that we live in a world where the lines between the truth and the narrative have become perpetually blurred. There is a specific kind of arrogance inherent in believing that we could fake the moon landings. Think about the scale. To pull off such a deception, one would need to fabricate not just a single television broadcast, but decades of supporting evidence. You would need the cooperation of the tracking stations in Australia and Spain, the independent observers in the Soviet Union, and the tens of thousands of vendors who supplied parts that were specifically engineered for a lunar environment, parts that would have been useless anywhere else. To fake the moon landings would have been, from a logistical and financial perspective, significantly more difficult than simply going to the moon itself. And yet, the hoax theory persists because it turns the story into something more manageable. It turns the vast, cold, indifferent reality of space into a story about humans, about sets, about actors, and about secrets. It domesticates the mystery. It pulls the cosmos down into a studio where we feel like we understand the rules of the game. But the rules of the cosmos are not the rules of the soundstage. And as we start to pull the thread of the specific scientific objections, you will begin to see that the hoax narrative relies entirely on a lack of context, a deliberate isolation of specific, misunderstood moments from the broader, unbreakable tapestry of physical reality. Consider the accusation of the fluttering flag. In the vacuum of space, how could a flag wave? This is the most enduring argument, repeated in countless forums and documentaries. It seems intuitive, doesn't it? No air, no wind, no flapping. Yet, this argument ignores the simplest of engineering solutions, a horizontal rod designed to hold the flag open, and the vibrations caused by the astronauts themselves as they struggle to stake the pole into the dense, packed lunar surface. The movement isn't the result of a breeze, it is the physical manifestation of kinetic energy, the momentum of a structure that would take a long time to come to rest in a low-gravity, vacuum environment. The very fact that this is presented as a gotcha moment shows how little the average person understands about the physics of the lunar environment. It is a perfect metaphor for the entire conspiracy, a simple misunderstanding of physics taken as a profound revelation of fraud. As we navigate through the coming sections of this documentary, we will look at this not with judgment, but with the curiosity that drives true scientific inquiry. We will walk through the images of the lunar surface, examining the shadows and the light, the dust and the rock, and we will show how the complexity of the moon is far beyond the reach of a simple stage design. We must also contend with the sheer endurance of these theories. We are no longer living in 1969. We have high-resolution satellites circling the moon right now, capturing images of the Apollo landing sites with such clarity that you can see the tracks left by the lunar rover. We have laser-ranging retroreflectors left on the surface that scientists bounce lasers off of to measure the distance between Earth and the moon to within a millimeter. These are not secret devices, they are public, observable, and reproducible experiments. And yet, the doubt remains. Why? Because the conspiracy is not about evidence. It is about a loss of connection to the reality of the physical world. In our digitized, mediated existence, where every photograph can be altered and every video deep-faked, we have lost the ability to distinguish between the tangible and the constructed. The moon landing hoax has become the archetype for all modern misinformation. It serves as the gateway drug for a life of skepticism, where no official source can be trusted and every institution is presumed to be part of a grand deception. By analyzing this specific event, we are effectively analyzing the health of our collective truth-seeking mechanism. What is it about the moon that makes it so prone to such wild, imaginative narratives? Perhaps it is the fact that the moon is our eternal companion, a celestial body that has dictated our tides, our calendars, and our myths since the dawn of our species. To claim we went there is, in some sense, to claim dominion over the divine. To claim we faked it is to preserve the mystery of the moon, to keep it safely out of reach of our grubby, mechanical hands. There is a deep, psychological resistance to the idea that humans could actually leave Earth. It makes the world seem smaller, more fragile, and less magical. But we will argue here that the truth is significantly more poetic than the fiction. The fact that we built, designed, tested, and flew machines across the void is a story that requires no embellishment to be astounding. The reality of the Saturn V rocket, the sheer, controlled explosion of fuel and fire that propelled men away from the gravity well, is more awe-inspiring than anything a Hollywood director could dream up on a soundstage. We will explore this reality in the next segment, where we will dive into the technical brilliance of the Apollo program, leaving the mythology behind to uncover the nuts and bolts of the most difficult engineering challenge in human history. As we move forward into the heart of this documentary, we will be leaving the surface level objections behind and shifting our focus to the internal logic of the mission. We will discuss the telemetry data, the flight paths, the biological constraints, and the absolute necessity of the global network that made communication possible. We will look at why it would have been easier to actually land on the moon than to maintain a deception of this magnitude for 54 years. The deeper we go, the more the conspiracy narrative crumbles under the weight of its own internal contradictions. We are creating a bridge from the world of suspicion to the world of evidence. By the time we finish this segment, you will see that the skepticism we feel is not a failure of intelligence, but a failure of communication. The history of the Apollo program was told through the lens of Cold War politics, which stripped it of its human, scientific, and technical nuance. By restoring that nuance, we restore the truth. Consider the sheer breadth of the scientific record. Every rock returned from the moon has been analyzed by thousands of scientists from dozens of nations, many of whom have no connection to the United States government or NASA. The chemical composition, the isotope ratios, the micrometeorite impacts, all of these are signatures that cannot be replicated in a terrestrial environment. They tell a story of a celestial body formed billions of years ago, a geological history that is utterly alien to the Earth. You cannot fake the mineralogy of the moon. You cannot fake the cosmic ray bombardment that has left distinct, permanent markers on every grain of lunar dust. This is the bedrock of our case. The physical evidence is not just lying around, it is screaming the truth from every laboratory shelf and every research paper. The hoaxers have no answer for the rock samples, just as they have no answer for the thousands of hours of flight data that are available to anyone with a computer and the curiosity to look for them. We are entering an era where the debate over the moon landing should be a closed case, and yet, the siren song of the conspiracy continues to pull people in. We have established the setting. We have addressed the initial, reflexive skepticism. We have set the stage for a deeper, more rigorous analysis. But why do we still feel that pull? Why do we, as a species, feel this need to question the extraordinary? Perhaps it is because deep down, we know how much can be hidden, how much can be manipulated, and how much can be controlled. The moon landing hoax is a cautionary tale about our own distrust. It serves as a reminder that when we lose faith in our ability to witness and verify the world, we become untethered from reality itself. We must reconcile our cynicism with the undeniable power of human capability. We must find a way to honor the doubt while embracing the truth. As we prepare to leave the ground, as we prepare to look at the cold, hard facts of the Apollo mission design, ask yourself this: what would it actually take to change your mind? Is there a piece of evidence, a logical argument, or a scientific proof that would break the spell of the conspiracy? Because as we proceed, we will provide all of those things in abundance. We will walk through the fire of the engines, the radiation of the Van Allen belts, and the darkness of space to show you exactly how it happened. And as we transition, keep in mind that the real mystery is not whether we went to the moon, but how, against all odds, a fractured, competitive, and mortal species managed to reach out and touch the face of another world. We have opened the window to this mystery, and as the narrative shifts from the culture of the hoax to the science of the reality, get ready to see the lunar landscape not as a backdrop for a movie, but as the final frontier that we were lucky enough to walk upon. We are about to strip away the artifice, dismantle the myths, and confront the sheer, breathtaking scale of our own potential. The countdown to the reality has begun. To peel back the curtain on the mechanics of space travel is to stare into the abyss of human limitation and recognize that we should not have survived. The Apollo missions were not a victory lap, they were an exercise in controlled chaos. When people suggest that the entire endeavor was faked in a studio, they demonstrate a fundamental misunderstanding of the era's limitations. To stage a moon landing in 1969 with the fidelity required to withstand half a century of inspection would have required technology that simply did not exist. Consider the state of visual effects in the late 60s. We had barely mastered the art of simple blue screen compositing for films like 2001, A Space Odyssey. Now, imagine trying to replicate the lighting of the moon, which is illuminated by a single, infinitely distant point source, the sun. On Earth, even in a massive hangar, lights have to be placed close to the subject. They create diverging beams, whereas sunlight arrives in parallel rays. This produces distinct, complex shadow patterns, shadows that behave differently on uneven lunar terrain than they would on a flat studio floor. A filmmaker would need a lighting rig of such immense scale and perfect calibration that the heat alone would melt the set. But let us move past the lighting and into the realm of the vacuum. The vacuum of space is a cruel, unforgiving environment that the average person views only as empty space. In reality, it is a high-pressure differential nightmare. A spacecraft is essentially a pressurized metal bubble surrounded by nothingness. The structural engineering required to maintain that pressure without structural failure is immense. We have the internal telemetry records from the Saturn V and the Command Service Module. This isn't just a video file that can be edited in a post-production suite, this is a sprawling, multi-dimensional data set of oxygen pressures, fuel pump revolutions, thruster firing times, and core temperatures. To fake this, one would have to retroactively create thousands of hours of perfectly synchronized, physics-consistent sensor data. If you change one variable, say, the burn duration of the descent engine, every other sensor reading must reflect the change. It is a mathematical web so dense that even a minor discrepancy would be caught by a first-year physics student. The conspiracy theorists often suggest the Apollo missions were a Hollywood production, but they overlook the fact that the scientists and engineers involved were not actors. They were the most brilliant minds of their generation, many of whom went on to build the very satellite networks that allow the modern internet to function. Are we to believe that these thousands of people, from different backgrounds, different political affiliations, and different nations, all maintained a seamless lie for 5 decades without a single deathbed confession or a shred of leaked documentation? The logistical impossibility of the conspiracy extends to the tracking of the spacecraft itself. During the Apollo missions, the command and lunar modules were tracked by ground stations all over the world, including the Honeysuckle Creek and Parkes radio telescopes in Australia. These were independent assets, not all under direct American control. If the spacecraft hadn't been where NASA claimed it was, these international observers would have known instantly. The telemetry signals were not a local broadcast, they were pulses sent across the void, received by ears in the southern hemisphere that were listening for the distinct, Doppler-shifted frequencies of a craft returning from deep space. To falsify this, you would need to corrupt the global infrastructure of radio astronomy. You would need to bribe or silence every operator, every technician, and every scientist who spent those nights huddled over oscilloscopes and data printers. It is a scale of coordination that borders on the divine, assuming a level of competence that no government in history has ever possessed. Furthermore, we must address the Van Allen radiation belts, a common talking point for skeptics who claim the astronauts should have been fried by solar radiation. This is a classic case of cherry-picked scientific concern. NASA was well aware of the radiation belts, and the flight paths were calculated specifically to minimize exposure. The Apollo craft passed through the belts at high speed, effectively treating them like a brief, heavy downpour that one runs through to get to cover. The radiation dosage received by the crew was equivalent to a few chest X-rays. It was not zero, but it was well within the limits of human tolerance. We have since sent countless robotic probes and satellites through these same zones, and we know exactly how much radiation they emit. The physics of particle shielding, the thickness of the aluminum hull, and the duration of transit all align perfectly with the mission logs. To argue that the radiation was lethal is to argue that we do not know how to measure radiation, a claim that is demonstrably false given that we use the same physics to operate nuclear power plants and medical imaging facilities globally. Beyond the physics, there is the biological reality of the men themselves. We have the medical data, the post-mission health reports, and the long-term monitoring of the Apollo astronauts. The physiological effects of space travel, the shifting of fluids, the degradation of muscle mass, the changes in inner ear equilibrium, are well-documented biological phenomena. The astronauts didn't just step off the spacecraft and onto a red carpet, they were physically diminished, often struggling with gravity upon their return. This wasn't just performance, it was the direct, observable toll of spending days in microgravity. If the landings were faked, were the astronauts also keeping up an elaborate charade for their entire lives? Were they submitting to medical tests, training for years in centrifuges and underwater tanks, and then living with the secret that their crowning achievement was a lie? The humanity of the Apollo program is often lost in the debate over lenses and shadows, but it is the strongest evidence we have. These were men who lived, breathed, and aged. Their testimony is not a script, it is the lived experience of human beings who pushed their bodies to the absolute limit of biological sustainability. We also need to look at the lunar surface itself through the lens of modern robotics. Since the late 2000s, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter has been orbiting the Moon, capturing high-resolution imagery of the surface. We can see, with startling clarity, the descent stages of the lunar modules, the tracks left by the lunar rovers, and even the footpaths where the astronauts walked. These images are available to the public. You can download them, zoom into them, and analyze the terrain. Some skeptics claim these images are faked, but they fail to account for the fact that other nations, Japan, India, China, have their own lunar missions. If there were no evidence of human activity on the Moon, do you really think our geopolitical rivals would stay silent? The Moon is the ultimate geopolitical scoreboard. If the United States had lied about landing there, the Soviet Union would have had every incentive to expose the fraud. They had the radar, the tracking, and the intelligence capability to verify whether or not a craft had reached the lunar surface. Instead, they recognized the achievement and shifted their own focus to space stations. The silence of the Soviet Union is perhaps the most damning piece of evidence against the conspiracy theorists, as they were the only entity with the motivation and the means to definitively prove that the Americans had failed. Consider the physical nature of the moon rocks themselves. We have brought back hundreds of kilograms of lunar material. These are not merely stones that look like rocks, they are samples that exhibit unique textures, like breccias and vesicular basalts, formed under conditions that simply do not exist on Earth. They contain no water, they show evidence of being bombarded by micrometeorites for billions of years, and they have isotopes that reflect a history of solar wind exposure which is unique to an environment lacking an atmosphere. You can go to any university with a geology department and find researchers who are still studying these samples. They are a treasure trove of information about the early solar system. To claim these rocks were faked or gathered in a desert requires you to believe that the global scientific community is either completely incompetent or engaged in a massive, coordinated fraud that spans decades and borders. It is a claim that collapses when you realize that lunar science is not a niche NASA project, but a global discipline. We aren't just talking about the United States, we are talking about the geological history of the Earth-Moon system itself. We must also confront the sheer economic and industrial scope of the program. At its peak, the Apollo program involved 400,000 people. These were not all government employees, they were workers at thousands of private firms, manufacturing everything from the guidance computers to the insulation blankets. They were plumbers, welders, welders' assistants, accountants, secretaries, and engineers. Every single one of them would have needed to be complicit in the silence. The idea that you could keep a secret among 400,000 people, for 50 years, in a society as litigious and gossipy as the United States, is frankly absurd. We cannot even keep presidential scandals quiet for a week. The idea that a fake mission to the moon could be pulled off without a single disgruntled employee, a single misplaced invoice, or a single shred of conflicting documentation being leaked is a testament to the fact that it wasn't a secret at all. It was the most public, transparent, and documented event in human history. The secret was actually a massive, decentralized, open-source project that relied on the specialized expertise of tens of thousands of individuals. When we strip away the conspiracy narrative, what we are left with is a story of incredible difficulty. The Apollo missions were plagued with malfunctions, close calls, and design flaws. The fire that killed the Apollo 1 crew was a horrific reminder of the dangers involved, and it forced the entire program to undergo a massive redesign. This was not a smooth process. It was a brutal, iterative cycle of learning from failure. If the landing were a movie, the directors would have had a much easier time just having the craft land perfectly every time. But real spaceflight is not perfect. It is full of alarms, system overloads, and last-second adjustments. When Neil Armstrong took manual control of the Eagle because the computer was steering them into a boulder field, that was a moment of genuine, life-or-death human decision-making. If it were a hoax, that would have been a poor directorial choice. You don't write a script where your main character is seconds away from running out of fuel and potentially crashing into an alien surface. But that is exactly what happened. The reality was messier, more dangerous, and more heroic than any fiction. We are slowly closing the circle on this investigation. We have looked at the light, the shadow, the atmosphere of distrust, the physics of the vacuum, the biological limits of the crew, and the global verification of the Apollo record. We have dissected the arguments and found that they rely on a deliberate isolation of facts, a strategy of debunking that refuses to acknowledge the broader, interdependent reality of spaceflight. But there is one final, crucial piece of this puzzle we must examine before we conclude. We have focused on the how, but we must now turn our attention to the why of the human imagination. Why does the modern mind struggle so deeply with the concept of our own greatness? Why do we find it more comforting to believe that we are the victims of a lie than to accept that we are the architects of a miracle? As we transition into the final segment of our documentary, we will look at the psychological landscape of the 21st century. We will explore how the internet has turned these isolated, fringe doubts into a digital firestorm, and what this says about the fragile state of our shared truth. We are going to look at the legacy of the moon landings, not just as a historical milestone, but as the benchmark for everything we hope to achieve in the future. As we move closer to a new era of lunar exploration, the old lies are being replaced by new, physical realities. Prepare to see the moon again, not through the grainy haze of the 60s, but through the clear, high-definition lens of the modern age. The truth is waiting, and it is far more breathtaking than any conspiracy could ever hope to be. The persistence of the moon landing conspiracy in the digital age is perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this entire saga. We are living in a time when information is more accessible than at any point in human history, yet we seem to be increasingly prone to the siren song of alternative realities. In the era of the internet, a single, compellingly edited video, complete with ominous music and pseudo-scientific narration, can reach millions of viewers before the truth has even had a chance to put on its boots. This is not merely a matter of technological literacy, it is a manifestation of how the architecture of the modern web encourages the formation of echo chambers. Algorithms are designed to prioritize engagement over accuracy, and there is nothing more engaging than a mystery that suggests you have been lied to by the powers that be. When a person discovers a community that validates their suspicion, that suspicion ceases to be a query and becomes a core component of their identity. The conspiracy theory functions as a form of intellectual armor. By adopting the mantle of the skeptic, individuals can insulate themselves from the overwhelming complexity of modern scientific achievement. It is a psychological defense mechanism. If the moon landing was a lie, then the vast, intimidating, and often incomprehensible march of human progress can be dismissed as nothing more than a narrative construct. It allows a person to stand outside the frantic, high-pressure, and deeply technical world of aerospace engineering and declare that they have seen through the veil. But in doing so, they miss the true, visceral beauty of the endeavor. The story of Apollo is not about the triumph of a government, it is the story of human beings, people with families, anxieties, and mundane lives, who dedicated years of their existence to solving the most complex puzzles the universe had ever thrown at them. To reduce that dedication to a stage act is to strip away the profound dignity of human effort. Consider the role of the expert in the conspiracy narrative. Skeptics often cite individuals who claim to be former aerospace engineers or whistleblowers, individuals who offer just enough technical-sounding jargon to sound credible to the layperson. Yet, these figures rarely subject their claims to the rigors of the scientific method. They do not publish in peer-reviewed journals, they produce documentaries, podcasts, and social media threads. True science is not a secret kept by an elite, it is a collaborative, transparent, and often argumentative process. If there were a legitimate scientific flaw in the Apollo record, it would be the professional prize of a lifetime for any researcher to expose it. The fact that the entire global scientific community, comprising millions of experts across every political and ideological spectrum, remains in consensus about the moon landing is not proof of a global conspiracy, but rather proof of the robustness of the evidence. We must also reckon with the evolution of the hoax narrative itself. In the early years, the claims were focused on the visual anomalies of the broadcast, the lighting and the flag. Today, however, we have moved into an era where deepfakes and artificial intelligence have further clouded the water. The irony is that the existence of modern generative technology is being used by some to retroactively support the theory that the original footage was faked. They argue that if we can create realistic imagery today, then surely, we could have done it in 1969. This is a profound misunderstanding of the technical leap required to go from celluloid film and practical lighting to the digital synthesis of reality. To fake a high-fidelity video in the 60s would have required a level of computer power, storage, and visual processing algorithms that were literally decades away from being invented. The skepticism of the present is built on a technological anachronism, a projection of today's tools onto the world of yesterday. Let us look toward the future. We are currently witnessing a resurgence in lunar interest, with private companies and international space agencies planning new missions to the surface. We are on the cusp of returning to the moon, not just to visit, but to stay. As we prepare to establish long-term lunar habitats, we will be using the very landing sites of the Apollo missions as historical landmarks. We will walk where they walked, and we will see, with our own eyes, the remnants of the descent stages, the equipment, and the footprints that have remained undisturbed in the vacuum for over 50 years. When this happens, and it is a near certainty in the coming decade, the conspiracy theory will finally, and irrevocably, lose its grip. The next generation of astronauts will provide the definitive, visual refutation of every lingering doubt. The moon will no longer be a distant, cinematic mystery, it will be a neighbor that we have finally moved into. But even then, a part of the conspiracy culture will likely remain. It is not about the evidence, it is about the yearning for a world that is simpler, where every event can be broken down into clear categories of hero and villain, of deception and truth. The reality is that the universe is indifferent to our narratives. Space is cold, the radiation is real, the distances are impossible, and yet, we did it anyway. That is the true, heroic core of the story. It is far more impressive that a fragile, biological species managed to engineer its way across the void than it would be if the whole thing were just a movie. The truth requires us to accept our own insignificance in the face of the cosmos, while simultaneously acknowledging our capacity to reach out and touch it. That is a difficult, humbling, and ultimately empowering realization. Reflecting on the history of this debate, we see that the most profound lesson is not found in the shadows of a lunar crater, but in the reflection of our own society. We have spent 50 years arguing about whether or not we left our home planet, all while the planet itself has been changing, while our technology has advanced in ways we could not have predicted, and while the moon has continued to cycle in the sky, unmoved by our debates. The suspicion we feel is a symptom of a broader crisis of trust, a crisis that exists in our politics, our media, and our scientific institutions. By unpacking this conspiracy, we have not only affirmed the reality of the Apollo landings, we have also identified the need to cultivate a more resilient, evidence-based culture. We need to be able to ask questions, to demand transparency, and to challenge our leaders without falling into the trap of rejecting reality itself. The Apollo missions remain the gold standard of what can be accomplished when we direct our collective intelligence toward a single, unified goal. They represent a moment in time when the impossible was rendered mundane through the sheer force of human will and mathematical precision. Every time we look up at the moon, we should see it not as a screen for our projections, but as a monument to our own tenacity. It is a beacon of what we can achieve when we refuse to let our internal divisions stop us from pushing the boundaries of our knowledge. The lunar surface is littered with the tools and the dreams of the people who paved the way, and it serves as a testament to the fact that we are a species of explorers. We are driven to understand, to map, and to go where no one has gone before, regardless of the risks and the inevitable failures that come with such ambition. In the final analysis, the conspiracy theory is a ghost that haunts the periphery of our history. It is a story we tell ourselves to avoid the awe of our own potential. But the facts, the telemetry, the physical artifacts, and the testimony of those who lived it all point to the same, singular conclusion: we did go, we did land, and we did return. The footprints in the regolith are the most powerful symbol of our ascent from the cradle of Earth. They are silent, enduring, and unmistakable. They remind us that there is no boundary we cannot cross, provided we have the courage to face the facts, the patience to do the work, and the honesty to acknowledge the truth when it stands before us. The era of the moon landing conspiracy is coming to an end, not through the shouting of slogans, but through the patient, inexorable advance of history. As we look forward to the next great leap in our cosmic exploration, we do so with a deeper appreciation for the foundation laid by the heroes of Apollo. We are not victims of a grand deception. We are the descendants of a generation that dared to look at the unreachable and claimed it as their own. The moon is our legacy, and it remains there, waiting for us to return with the same spirit of curiosity and wonder that first led us to the sea of tranquility. Let us carry that spirit forward, past the myths, past the cynicism, and into the future that is currently unfolding in our laboratories and our launch pads. We are, and we always have been, a species of reachers, builders, and dreamers. The truth is not hidden in the dark corners of a soundstage, it is written across the stars, and it is reflected in every discovery we have yet to make. The mission is not over. It is only beginning. We have taken the first step into the universe, and we will never truly be at home until we have seen the rest of it. From the first spark of an idea in a crowded room to the final, silent return of the command module, the story of Apollo is ours to hold, to honor, and to continue. It is the greatest adventure we have ever known, and it is exactly what it appears to be, a masterpiece of human, and therefore, entirely real, discovery.